Well, I'm charged with the task of bringing things to a close. I was given a 30-minute time slot so that I could make some remarks, but I think everybody's been here for a really long day, so I'm just going to be extremely brief. First, I'm going to start off with thanks. All of you that have come here have given up part of other things that you could have been doing. You could have been spending time with your students, with your families, relaxing somehow, and instead you came here to do something really important, and that's to learn something new. And so that, I think, is a real tribute both to the college here that put the event together, but also to yourself. So thank you very much for showing that kind of attitude. But I think, if I consider the kind of arc that we've gone through from last night through to this afternoon in the final session, it's really interesting because in some ways it reproduces an arc of change that I think we're going through sort of globally. And we started off with Don talking about the big picture APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. And really what he was focusing on is large-scale institutions and how that all works. But if you listen to us talk closely, one of the things that came through that got reproduced as we went through today's talks is that we don't just live in a world of increasing interdependence. Everybody talks about that. It's really a world of increasing interpenetration. That interdependence entails interpenetration. That it's not just that the individual is the unit of analysis any longer. It's relational dynamics that are the basic unit of analysis. And we saw that when we went to Jeff and his talks about what's going on in China and China's own self-understanding and how that is in fact being undertaken relationally. Is China vis-a-vis its partners within its own region and globally. When we listened to Andrea this afternoon, we also learned that it's the penetration of these dynamics is not just down to the national level, it's not just down to the local level, it's into the family, it's into the psyche. That the globalization, forces of globalization, of increasing interdependence, it's integration, it's also fragmentation, and we get both of those. It's increasing homogenization and increasing differentiation. And so Chris ended up with this sort of litany of all the stuff that's going on with growth in China, and the last bit of it I think was really telling, and that's the income gaps that are opening up. And this isn't just in China, it's a broad historical phenomenon. If you go back to 1810 and looked at the income gap between the top quintile of countries in the world and the bottom quintile, the top 20%, bottom 20%, the ratio was 3 to 1. In 1913, it was 11 to 1. In 1950, it was 35 to 1. In 1973, it was 76 to 1. It was in 1998, 86 to 1, and the best estimates that I've seen today, it's 126 to 1. So it's an historical phenomenon. If you look in the United States, over the last 30 years, from 1976 to 2007, of the total increase of income in the United States, total increase, 80%, 80, went to the top 1%. Globally, the top 1% of the planet has 40% of global wealth. The top 2% has 65% of global wealth. The bottom 50% of the planet has less than 1% of global wealth. I was jumping to the American side, which is worse. In the US, the top 1% has over 40% of the wealth of the country. The bottom 40% of this country has less than 1/3 of 1% of wealth. So the gaps are opening. And I think that the take home really is that, we talk a lot about the problems that we need to solve. But we don't really live in a world of problems any longer. We live in a world of predicaments. Problems are when you've got an existing set of aims and interests that you're going to continue to pursue, and whatever techniques you've got, whatever methodology you've been using, no longer works. It's failing you. You want the same ends, you want to pursue the same interests, but you got to solve the problem. You need new techniques, new aims, new interests. You need to innovate. You know where you want to go, you're just not quite sure how to get there, but you know where you want to end up. That's not really the world that we live in anymore. We live in a world of predicaments. Predicaments occur when you're made to be aware of the fact that there's a conflict among your own values, aims, and interests. You don't solve predicaments, you can only resolve them. It takes clarity and it takes resolution. It takes resolve in both of those senses of the English word. And that's where we go back to what Don was talking about. We need a different set of values to operate. They're not just going to be American values. They're not just going to be Chinese values or Japanese values or Indian values or Brazilian values. Somehow the real difficulty that we face is how do you take all the differences that are being produced in the world, some of them income gaps, some of them culture gaps, some of them technology gaps. The gaps, the differences can be productive. Differences are the basis of mutual contribution. I don't wake up in the morning and talk to myself, and I hope nobody else in the room does that. You wake up in the morning, you call someone who's different from you. You wake up in the morning and you try to learn something that you don't know. So the differences can be productive, but we haven't done a very good job of realizing the productive potential of our differences. We need to kind of do something different that hasn't been done yet, and that's to go from the emphasis on unity, the individual as a unit of analysis, to saying what's the relational dynamic that we need to achieve? How do we get those differences to contribute to shared welfare, to an increased shared flourishing for everybody? So that's the task in front of us. And for that, we don't need to innovate, we need to improvise. It's like musicians. You don't get together and start playing jazz in order to finish the tune. You play in order to see how much you can push the envelope of what it means to play music. You need to push the envelope of what it means to do economics, what it means to do higher education. And I think that a forum like this that we've had over the last it seems like it's been 2 days, but it's really just an evening talk and an all day, is the kind of beginning I think that's necessary. People from very different backgrounds, with very different interests, very different cognitive sets, coming together. And if we wanted to top it all off, we'd all go out to dinner together, have a drink together, and that's when the real work would begin. When we'd see whether we couldn't activate our differences as the basis of mutual contribution to sustainably shared flourishing. That, I think, is what higher education is all about. Higher education is embedded in a very unusual way within global dynamics because it operates at the most local level. The individual student who comes into the classroom has their own history, their own family dynamics. Each one of them is different. Yet it's a community that's a part of. The community college system was the idea of community and being built into a community. But it's the same thing at colleges, same things at major universities. There's a local level, there's the national level, the regional level, and the global level, and they interpenetrate. Higher education is in a very unique position to be able to influence the relational dynamics that are taking place. We heard about capital accumulation, capitalism being focused on accumulation. One of the things that I would posit is that we don't live in a world where the logic of accumulation is going to work very much longer. It's really a logic of circulation. And the question is how do you get those circulatory dynamics to be healthy dynamics? It means doing something that we now consider just metaphorical. What does it mean to have a healthy economy? We think that's a metaphorical issue. I posit that it's not. It's really a struggle that we need to go through. It's the same thing like we ask the question values. Values gets talked about a lot in higher education. We heard it with Don's talk. Values, the way that we use the term now, cultural values, political values, national values, that only started in the 1920s. There was a 1918 sociology paper that was written about Polish peasants, an anthropology paper. The first time the word values was used quite that way. People talked about, of course, motivations and priorities and so on. But the concept of values is really recent. It emerged out of a discussion about value and the meaning of value in economic terms. We're now ready to really start putting those two together, to struggle in our colleges and universities to understand what really are values. Are these psychic phenomena that come hang above the world that we live in, or are they embedded directly there in our relational dynamics? I would posit that they're there in our relational dynamics. They're not things you really should be talking about, you demonstrate them. So we go back to our families, we go back to our classrooms, we go back to our colleges and universities, our international organizations, and let's see if we can't walk the walk of making the values for the 21st century. Thank you all very much.